They left an alien widow and her child to rot in a cage, but only one human heard the child crying. Shard's Edge didn't forget people. It buried them under noise, under frost, under paperwork that never made it past the fourth form. Glenn Mallory adjusted the collar of his inspection vest as he stepped off the mag-rail platform and into the auxiliary subquarters. The light here was thinner, flickering between broken panels. Cold crept through the seams of the station's outer hull, leaving a faint sheen of condensation on every exposed surface. His boots made a hollow clack over rusted grating as he walked, echo swallowed by the vast, quiet rot of the wing. It wasn't supposed to be active. The log showed this section as decommissioned after a structural breach 7 years ago. No active power, no environmental controls, certainly no food deliveries. And yet, his datapad pulsed with a fresh anomaly: processed rations 2 weeks ago. Logged under an obsolete inventory code, cross-referencing showed no consumption, no redistribution, no disposal, a digital ghost. Glenn frowned, tapping through the screen again, as if another look would make the corruption vanish. But the entry was clean. Too clean. Deliberately so. He'd seen this before, on Calyx 4, when he was just a junior systems analyst. Rows of hungry refugees, supplies siphoned by private contractors, corpses listed as discharged. He'd reported it. No one listened. After that, he learned to be careful. But this felt worse. He moved deeper into the wing, past crumpled panels and warning placards long faded. Every breath was cold and metallic. Then he heard it, a sound, thin, trembling, not mechanical. It didn't echo right. It slipped into the air like a stringed note played through frost, fragile and unplaceable. It wasn't speech, but it had shape, pain wearing a melody's mask. He followed it, rounding a stack of dead consoles and shattered bins. His breath hitched when he saw the shape half buried in the dark. A cage. Not a standard holding cell. No biometric locks. No plasma barrier. Just welded freight grating, bent and rusted at the seams. It had been patched with stripped wall insulation and wrapped in layers of tarp that sagged from the ceiling like old skin. The bars were corroded, the welds sloppy. A child's old drawing, half torn, faded, clung to one edge with broken adhesive. 2 figures under a crooked star. Inside, a woman crouched low, unmoving. Her green skin had a faded shimmer, dull beneath grime and cold sweat. Her long white hair was tangled, some of it frozen to the tarp behind her. Arms wrapped tightly around a small figure. A girl, maybe 5 or 6. The child stirred, then made the sound again. It wasn't a cry in the way humans cried. It came from deep in the chest, rising in fractured tones, like broken glass refracting light. It resonated off the metal walls, not echoing, but vibrating, alive. Glenn felt the sound in his ribs. He stepped closer. The glass partition separating the storage wing from the cage was dirty, half fogged with time and breath. He wiped a patch clear with his sleeve. The girl looked up. Her eyes were too large, too bright, pale green irises haloed with milky silver, catching the light like a cat's in the dark. Her skin matched her mother's and her hair fell in long, unbrushed strands around her narrow shoulders. She stared at him. Then slowly, cautiously, she moved her hand forward. Her tiny fingers were trembling as she pressed her palm against the glass. A small cloud of condensation bloomed there. She didn't blink, just waited. The mother didn't move. Glenn knelt, breath short, heartbeat rising. His gaze swept the cage. Scratches lined the lower bars. Not random, repeated, small, desperate. Tiny claw marks near the latch, too fine to belong to an adult. An empty nutrient pack sat crumpled in the corner, its seal unbroken. Mold grew in the corner near a leaking pipe. There were smears, dried stains he didn't want to name, and a bundle of cloth barely serving as bedding. No sanitation, no comm panel, no tracking tag. This wasn't a cell. It was a grave someone hadn't bothered to seal. He blinked hard and exhaled. The breath caught in his throat. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a small light beacon, a diagnostics tool, and clicked it once. The light blinked soft amber, rhythmic. Then he tapped the beacon against the glass, slow and deliberate. A pattern. Tap, 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 tap. The girl flinched, then mimicked it. Her fingers tapped once, paused, then again. Her hand was shaking, but she was trying. Something inside Glenn cracked, something he'd welded shut years ago with protocol and performance reviews and mission logs. He pressed his hand to the glass, palm out. The girl mirrored it, but she couldn't quite reach. Her hand hovered just short, fingers splayed, breath fogging between them. From behind her, the mother stirred. She shifted, barely, eyes half-lidded, and met Glenn's gaze through the smudged glass. There was no panic in her face, no recognition, just exhaustion so deep it had hollowed her from the inside out. She looked at him the way someone looks at a window during a storm, hoping the shape outside is only wind. Glenn tried to speak but stopped. What could he say? Why are you here? Who put you here? Why didn't anyone tell me? Instead, he whispered, almost to himself, I see you. The child leaned into the glass. A small sound escaped her again. Short, rising, fragile. Then came the words. Shaky. Software. Me. Hush. Mama, hush. The lullaby fragments hit him like a punch. Not because they made sense, but because they didn't. She didn't know what else to say. That's all she had left. Glenn stood slowly, jaw clenched. He backed away from the glass, eyes still on theirs, and grabbed his datapad. The log was still there, sanitized, edited. He tapped a note into the pad, then closed it. He would come back, tomorrow, with food, with warmth, with questions they couldn't dodge. And maybe, just maybe, he'd bring a little noise back to the place that had forgotten how to listen. Because someone had heard that child cry, and it was going to matter. Glenn didn't eat. He didn't file the report he was supposed to. He sat at the edge of his cot, boots still on, arms resting against his knees, staring down at the floor like it might hold some hidden map of what to do next. Sleep never came. The image of that cage, the frost-laced bars, the girl's tiny hand smudging the glass, the mother's sunken eyes, looped through his mind like a broken reel. He couldn't shake the sensation that when he'd walked away, they might have stopped existing altogether. Like the second he turned his back, silence reclaimed them again. He'd seen neglect before. On Calyx 4, there were entire decks of displacement vessels where children slept in storage crates while higher-ups lost the paperwork. He remembered one boy who starved 3 meters from an untouched shipment of food. Glenn had logged the incident, submitted the report. The crates moved. The boy didn't. He promised himself he wouldn't just watch again. Before morning cycle, Glenn was already moving. No clearance requests this time. Just a toolkit, a low-grade ration warmer tucked in the bottom, and an insulated pouch with nutrient mash and hydration gels. All unmarked, all unofficial. He logged a fake equipment diagnostic and routed it through an old maintenance subcode, one no one checked anymore. Shard's edge had plenty of shadows. He just had to stay within them. By the time he reached the forgotten wing, the corridor lights were worse, half flickering, half dead. Ice webbed along the seams of the walls. No patrols, no cameras, just rust, vapor, and quiet. But behind the reinforced glass, they were still there. The girl moved first. She didn't run to the window. She inched, wary, as if sudden movement might reset the world around her. Her bare feet made no sound against the frozen flooring, but her presence was unmistakable. Green skin pale with cold. Long white hair like braided snow. Her bioluminescent temples didn't shimmer today. That scared him more than anything. He knelt by the access hatch and tapped gently. The girl didn't startle this time. That made it worse. She was already used to being visited by ghosts. He pushed through the pouch. Warm, soft food, water with actual mineral content, a fresh thermal strip. Her fingers brushed his as she took it, still trembling. He watched her crawl back, carefully sharing the food with the motionless figure on the floor. The woman hadn't moved. Her limbs were folded in on themselves like scaffolding collapsing inward. Her hair, longer now that he could see it fully, fanned out behind her like a white shroud. Glenn wondered when she'd last stood, if she even could. As the girl fed her mother in small bites, wiping her lips with part of the thermal strip, Glenn felt something behind his ribs collapse. They weren't just surviving. They were still trying to care for each other. In here, in this frozen box no one had ever meant to open again. He lowered his voice. "My name's Glenn," he said softly through the glass. "I'm not here to report you or hurt you. I see you." The girl looked up. She didn't say anything, but she scooted a little closer, still holding the food. Then she did something unexpected. She reached into a corner of the cage and pulled out a ragged scrap of plastifilm. A drawing. Crude, childlike, but unmistakable. Two figures holding hands beneath a crooked star. One tall, one small. The tall figure had long white hair. She pressed it to the glass, eyes searching his. It was a question, or maybe a challenge. Would he be the other hand? "I'm not going to disappear," he whispered. "I came back." Behind her, the mother stirred. Her fingers twitched, closing around a ration wrapper. Then slowly, painfully, she pushed herself upright. It wasn't elegant. It was the movement of someone not used to their own bones anymore. But it was movement. Glenn stood frozen as she raised her head. Her face was drawn, elegant in a way that defied the grime. Green skin marbled faintly with silvery veins, stretched too tightly over high cheekbones. Her eyes met his, and for the first time, she didn't look away. He couldn't breathe. "Do you know what they call this wing?" she asked, voice barely more than breath. It startled him. Her tone was low, melodic, but cracked, like a shattered instrument still trying to play its song. It was the voice of someone who'd had too many reasons to stop speaking. He stepped closer. "No," he said. "What do they call it?" She looked around the cage, then back at him. "Graveyard. No one checks the graveyard." Silence hung heavy between them. "I didn't know," Glenn said quietly. "I swear." "I believe you," she murmured. "But that's worse." Glenn swallowed. "Why?" "Because if someone like you didn't know," she said, "then it means we were erased completely." The girl nestled into her side, curling under one arm. She didn't cry. She didn't need to. Her silence spoke in tones older than words. Glenn pressed a hand to the glass. "I want to help," he said. "I don't know how yet, but—" "No," she said, voice harder now. "Not yet." He blinked. "I have a daughter," she said, resting her hand on the girl's head. "That is why I don't scream. That is why I don't beg. Not while they watch." Glenn realized then, there were no cameras in this hallway, but she'd lived so long with eyes she couldn't see, with consequences she couldn't predict, that she treated every shadow like a potential death sentence. He stepped back. "I'm not going to leave you," he said, "but I have to be smart. If I pull you out now, I alert the system. They'll erase you again, but faster." Her jaw tensed. "Then why come?" "Because I won't let you die in the dark." Her breath hitched. He placed a small patch on the glass, a signal node, set to blink every 6 hours. "I'll come when this pulse is red, every time, until I can do more." She didn't nod, but she didn't turn away, and as he left, her voice followed him, barely audible over the hum of dying lights. "Your name," she said. "Say it again." He paused. "Glenn?" A pause. Then her whisper, too soft for malice, too quiet for hope. "Then you're real." He didn't speak again. He walked the corridor alone, but not cold. Not anymore. Because something in that graveyard had come back to life. And now, it had a name. The corridor outside the cage had cooled with the station's artificial dust cycle. Dim wall strips hummed, washing the steel plating in sterile hues. Glenn stood beside the door again. Closer this time. Not just watching, listening, trying to interpret the silence inside the cell. He tapped his pad. The data feed flickered. The system still flagged the enclosure as quarantine, but no pathogen had ever been logged. It was a lie. Another bureaucratic shield. He had seen plenty of them used this way, quietly, permanently. Inside, the woman, Syrah, sat on the rust-stained floor with her back to the wall. Her long white hair fell like drapes around her face, shielding her expression. She hadn't spoken since that whispered "don't wake her" the day before. Not a word. Leary stirred beside her mother. The child's small frame trembled under the thermal blanket Glenn had passed through the bar gap. She'd wrapped it like a cocoon, but one hand peeked out. Thin fingers, green-skinned, slightly curled as if reaching for something in a dream. Glenn didn't speak. Not yet. He just crouched, level with the bars, and watched them breathe. In unison. Synchronized like they shared a single heartbeat. He remembered the first time he'd seen death up close. Not on the station, but years ago on a derelict freighter orbiting Yanisfor, a failed refugee vessel. When they opened the hold, the air had been thick with silence, but not the kind that meant peace, the kind that settled over injustice and made itself comfortable. That silence lived here, too. "Leary," he said gently, testing the name. The girl's fingers twitched. Then her eyes fluttered open. Bright, unblinking, mismatched tones of blue and jade, too wide for her small face. She didn't speak, but her hands stretched toward the bars. Glenn reacted instinctively. He reached through the narrow gap, palm up. No sudden moves, just offering. She blinked, tilted her head, and placed her hand in his. Her skin was cool, not sickly, just underfed. She didn't flinch, didn't even seem surprised. "Why is she so quiet?" he murmured. He wasn't sure if he meant Leary or her mother. "I told her to be," Sierra said suddenly. Her voice was low, coarse, as if she hadn't used it in weeks. She hadn't looked up yet, but her tone carried something. Shame, maybe, or exhaustion. "You told her to be quiet?" Glenn asked gently. Sierra finally looked up. Her eyes were a brilliant green that had once, he imagined, startled people into silence. Now they were dulled by sleeplessness and dread. "If they hear her cry," she said, "they might come back." Glenn's jaw tightened. "Who?" Sierra shook her head. "Not now, please." He didn't push. Not yet. Instead, he sat down, right there on the cold deck, shoulder to the bars. "I brought something better than nutrient packs today," he said, unwrapping a heat-sealed tray. "Warm vegetable stew. Cheap, sure, but rich, real." The scent drifted through the gaps. Leary perked up, eyes wide. "Can I give it to her?" he asked. Sierra hesitated. Her hands tightened around her knees. "She's hungry," Glenn added, "and it's not poisoned." Sierra slowly nodded. Glenn slid the tray under the narrow floor hatch. Leary darted forward and crouched next to it, carefully scooping it up in both hands. She brought the tray to the corner and sat cross-legged, nibbling like a bird. Delicately, though it was clear she was starving. "She still waits for permission to eat," Glenn said softly. "I taught her that," Sierra whispered. "When they took the others. The ones who screamed were the first to be dragged out." Glenn didn't ask who they were. He didn't want to see that look in her eyes again. Not yet, but he needed her to understand something else. "I checked the system logs," he said. "There's no record of either of you being processed, no charges, no health scans, not even a name tag in the detainee index." "I'm not surprised," she said. Her voice cracked. "We were already erased." Glenn looked down. "They didn't do a good job, then." "Because you're still here." For the first time, her mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. "Why are you here?" she asked, her voice barely audible. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he leaned back against the wall and stared at the ceiling. "Because I used to ignore things like this. And every time I did, it became easier to pretend I hadn't seen it." "You're not like them," she said. Glenn met her eyes number. "But I used to be." A moment passed, then another. And then Leary broke it. Not with words, but with sound. A soft humming noise, almost like a lullaby. Wordless, yet strangely familiar. She swayed slightly as she ate, humming to herself. Sierra looked at her daughter. "She sings like her father." Glenn blinked. "He's gone?" Sierra didn't answer. Just reached out and brushed Leary's hair back gently. Then, as if afraid of saying too much, she whispered, "He was kind. That was enough for now." "Would it help," Glenn asked carefully, "if I tried to get you both moved somewhere else? Out of here?" Sierra's eyes filled, not with tears, but with something harder to name. Weariness, caution, hope, buried under layers of disbelief. "They won't let us out," she said. "Not without papers, not without someone to vouch." I'm someone, he said. She stared at him, as if daring herself to believe it, but she said nothing more. That night, Glenn didn't go back to his assigned quarters. He stayed in the corridor, leaning against the wall, watching over them like a silent sentinel. It was the first time Leary fell asleep with her head in her mother's lap, and her hands still curled near the bars, reaching toward him even in sleep. And it was the first time Sarah, just before sleep claimed her, whispered something meant only for the dark. If we live, if we ever leave this cage, will you stay? Glenn didn't answer, but his presence was already the beginning of a promise. The silence between them had changed. It wasn't the heavy, defensive kind that weighed the air in the early days, not the silence of fear or guarded pain. Now it felt different, tentative, almost expectant, as though the emptiness between words had become a bridge rather than a wall. Glenn had brought another stew tray, this time with softer bread folded in wax paper. Leary accepted it without hesitation now. She no longer watched him like a stranger. She watched him like she was studying his soul, carefully, silently, but not fearfully. Sarah sat a little closer to the bars this time, her knees pulled up to her chest, arms wrapped loosely around them. She still looked like someone who had forgotten how to take up space, but less like someone trying to disappear completely. The lights flickered overhead, dimming into the simulated evening cycle. Your voice, Glenn said almost gently, sounds different today. Sarah looked up slowly, brows knitting. Not as sharp, he clarified. Still guarded, but you don't sound like you're choking on every word anymore. She gave him a long, unreadable look. I used to talk more than anyone, she finally said. Before. Before what? Her hands tightened slightly. Before they took me. He didn't ask who they were. She wasn't ready for that yet. Instead, he asked, who were you before they took you? Her voice thinned. A singer, a voice keeper. Glenn leaned forward slightly, intrigued. A singer? We carry stories through song. Generations. Memories that can't be trusted to machines. Where I come from, the voice keeper sings the names of the dead, the births, the warnings. Our children grow up learning them. I used to teach those songs. He let that settle. And now? Now I sing nothing. Leary looked up from her corner, cheeks full of bread. But you hum sometimes, she said softly, her first full sentence to him yet. Both adults turned toward her. Sarah blinked. I do? You did. When I had fever, Leary said. You thought I was asleep. Glenn met Sarah's eyes again. She's listening more than you realize. She always has, Sarah said, her voice breaking for the first time since he'd met her. She listened to things no child should ever hear. Glenn nodded. He didn't push, but it was time. He had to give something back. My brother died on a garbage skiff orbiting Delve 2, he said carefully. He was one of the thousands they never reported. He was born in the same district I was, same skin, same blood, but he drew the wrong number. Got sent to die in a sector no one monitors. Sarah's gaze sharpened. You lost family. I lost the illusion that anyone cared, Glenn said. After that, I joined Fleet Services. I thought I'd make changes. Instead, I made reports. And now? Now I make noise, he said. And sometimes I listen. Sarah didn't speak, but she shifted again. A subtle movement, closer to the bars, closer to him. How did you end up here? Glenn asked gently now. This station, this cage. Sarah exhaled slowly. They said I was non-compliant. My species. We have rules. Women breed. Men rule. I refused the pairing. Refused again. And then again. Her voice became thin and sharp as a blade. They told me I was untrainable. A waste of genetic material. They sold my first child. My second died in processing. She didn't look at Glenn. Couldn't. I ran. I didn't even know this station existed. But I knew a man here. He'd once heard me sing. He tried to hide us. It wasn't enough. They found us in the water tanks. Glenn felt his stomach twist. And they put you here. She nodded. No charges, no trial, just a cage. Because no one asked why aliens are detained. They just assume we're dangerous. Glenn clenched his hands. You're not. I'm just exhausted. Leary crawled into her mother's lap. She didn't say anything, but her tiny hand found Sierra's and held tight. Sierra whispered, "She's all I have." Glenn said nothing for a long moment. Then, "Would you come with me if I found a way to get you out?" Sierra's breath hitched. "What do you mean?" "I know a civilian review panel in the outer sectors. If I call in every favor I've ever earned, if I falsify enough internal discrepancies, I might be able to override the hold." "You'd risk that?" He nodded. "I'd rather risk that than live knowing I let this happen." She looked at him for a long, long time. "If you get us out," she said quietly, "I don't know if I can offer you anything. I have nothing left." "You've already offered something," Glenn said. "What?" "You reminded me I can still care." Silence fell again, but it was warm now, familiar. Sierra shifted closer, and Leary tucked herself between their conversation like a child wedging herself into a space that felt safe. They didn't touch hands, not yet, but they stayed there side by side against the bars until the lights dimmed and the station whispered into sleep. The storm had started before morning. Orbital Penal Sector 9 didn't get weather, not in the natural sense, but when the outer shields buckled and gravity coils strained, it mimicked the howl of a planetary windstorm. Lights dimmed. The bulkheads groaned. Power flickered through the cell block corridors like lightning caught in glass. Glenn moved fast. He had an official work tablet in one hand and a meal tray in the other, but neither mattered. What mattered was the override code stored on the encrypted chip under his tongue. A one-time bypass key meant only for emergency evacuations. He'd stolen it from the maintenance depot's blacklisted bin 3 years ago. At the time, he'd told himself it was insurance. Now it was salvation. He reached the cell just before lights dimmed again. Leary was curled in a nest of folded cloth rations, her cheeks flushed, but her eyes were alert. She looked up when he approached and gave a small, instinctive smile. Sierra didn't smile, but she met his gaze. "No patrols?" she asked, her voice low. "None yet," Glenn said. "The shield failures bought us time. Every drone's rerouted to Baylocks. This is the quietest it's going to be." Her eyes flicked toward the corridor. "Then why are you here?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he placed the tray down between the bars and knelt to her eye level. "Because you need to be gone before the backup systems re-engage." She stared. "You mean today?" He nodded. "Now, I don't have clearance to remove you legally, but I can redirect a prisoner transport pod during the shield reset." Sierra stood slowly. Her limbs trembled. Not from fear, Glenn realized, but from disbelief. "What happens if they catch us?" He swallowed. "They won't catch you. They'll catch me, and they'll bury the whole report." "You'd be executed," Glenn shrugged. "I've been dead inside for years. This question mark. This is the first thing that's made sense in a long time." Leary tugged at her mother's sleeve. "Mama?" Sierra knelt beside her. "We might be leaving. With Glenn." Leary blinked. "Is it warm outside the cage?" Glenn smiled despite the tension. "It's warmer than this." Sierra looked at him again, voice barely audible. "Why?" He hesitated, then answered honestly. "Because I care what happens to you. Because no one else will. Because I'm tired of watching good people rot behind locked doors." She looked like she wanted to believe him. Her hands curled into her palms. "I'm not the woman I was," she whispered. "I'm damaged. You must know that." "Good," he said, "because I'm not looking for someone perfect. I'm looking for someone real." They held that look for a breath longer than either of them expected. Then, movement. A hiss down the corridor. The sound of boots. "Now!" Glenn hissed. He stepped forward, slid the encryption key into the panel near the cage door. It blinked. Red, then green. The cage shuddered. Sierra stepped back, shielding Leary with her arms. "It's okay," Glenn whispered. "You're not prisoners anymore." The door slid open for the first time in 4 years. Sierra didn't move at first. Her feet were frozen. But then Leary stepped forward, and her mother followed. Glenn backed into the hallway. "Stay close. Don't talk." They slipped her through the service tunnels, Sierra carrying Leary, Glenn checking corners with the tension of a hunted animal. He had rerouted the maintenance camera loop, but it wouldn't last more than 15 minutes. The air down here smelled of coolant and rust. Pipes dripped overhead. Glenn's boots echoed, but Syrah's were nearly silent. He found that impressive, then wondered how many places she'd had to flee before this. When they reached the evac pod, Glenn entered the emergency override. The hatch hissed open. He turned to Syrah. "You'll land at New Athara Port. There's a safe contact in a florist's stall. A woman named Nin. Tell her I sent you." She hesitated. "What about you?" "I'll delay the alarms. Backdate the report. I have maybe an hour to make it look like the system hiccuped." She grabbed his arm suddenly. "Come with us." He froze. "I can't," he said. "Not yet. If I disappear now, they'll assume sabotage. But if I cover the trail, you'll die here. Maybe." She stepped closer. Her eyes, violet and burning, stared straight into him. "You matter to us," she whispered. It was the first time she'd said us. He touched her cheek, barely, reverently. "I know." Leary hugged his leg without warning. "Don't forget us." "I won't," he said, kneeling. "You be brave now, all right? Keep your mama safe." She nodded. Her lower lip wobbled, but she was brave. Syrah stepped into the pod. She didn't cry, but her fingers lingered on the hatch edge longer than they needed to. Just before the door shut, she whispered, "You're not dead inside anymore." And then she was gone. The pod shot into the emergency rail tunnel. Glenn stared after it until the tunnel lights dimmed again. Then he turned and ran toward the control deck to burn every trace of what he had just done. The storm inside Glenn hadn't stopped. He sat alone in the maintenance bay's backup control room, eyes locked on the black screen where the escape pod's tracking signal had once pulsed like a heartbeat. It was gone now, off the grid, off the record, buried beneath layers of tampered logs and overwritten footage. As far as the prison's archaic systems were concerned, no pod had launched. No detainees were missing. And yet every breath Glenn took felt like borrowed time. He didn't know what had shaken him more, the terrifying quiet of a successful escape, or the echo of Syrah's final words before the pod sealed shut. "You're not dead inside anymore." He repeated them in his head like a mantra, a curse, and a promise. Then he got up, wiped the sweat from his palms, and went back to pretending nothing had changed. 2 sectors away, a windless dusk hung over the ruins of New Athara's outer district. The escape pod had touched down just before dawn, embedding itself in an abandoned cargo yard hidden beneath a broken canopy of solar plating. The impact had jarred Syrah's shoulder, but she hadn't flinched. She'd waited 3 full minutes before unstrapping Leary and stepping into the cold light of the colony's forgotten edge. Everything felt too open. No guards, no surveillance beams, just the whine of wind slipping between collapsed scaffolding and the scent of oxidized metal. Syrah led Leary forward, barefoot and silent. They reached the edge of a silent loading bay when the girl tugged at her mother's arm. "Mama, are we free now?" Syrah knelt, pressing her forehead against Leary's. "Yes," she whispered, "but we still need to hide. Can you be brave a little longer?" Leary nodded, solemn and small. "I'll be brave, if you stay with me always." "I'm not going anywhere," Syrah promised. "Not again." It took them 2 hours to reach the edge of the settlement, and another 20 minutes before Syrah found the flower stall Glenn had described. It was barely a shop, just a curved awning, a few pots of alien mosses, and a weather-worn woman trimming faded petals. She looked up when Syrah approached and didn't smile. But when Syrah whispered, "Glenn sent us," the woman's gaze sharpened. That night, Syrah and Leary had a bed. It wasn't much, just a thin mat in a storage shed behind the stall. But it was the first time in years Syrah had closed her eyes without cold steel pressing into her spine. Days passed. Leary smiled more often now. She found fascination in the smallest things. The way sunlight slanted through the cracks in the shutters, the rough texture of floorboards under her toes, the drip of condensation on the walls. Syrah, on the other hand, found it harder to breathe. She couldn't stop expecting the alarms, the boots, the return to the cage. But they never came, and each day without them stretched like a thread pulling her towards something unfamiliar, something terrifying. Hope. One evening, as Leary slept curled beside her, Syrah found herself holding a cracked tablet Glenn had included in the pod. A preloaded communicator, barely functional, and set to a single frequency. She stared at it for a long time before speaking into the darkness. "I don't know if you can hear this," she said softly, "but if you're listening, we made it. Leary is safe. She laughed this morning. It was the most beautiful sound." A pause. "And I miss you." She didn't expect a response. The tablet remained dark, but somewhere across the void, Glenn stood under flickering bulkhead lights, hand resting on a hidden receiver. Listening. The next message came 3 days later. "I found work," Sierra said, "helping Nin with the deliveries. My hands shake less now. I think maybe I'm not broken." Another pause, then quieter. "You were right. About me. I'm still a woman. Still someone." Her voice cracked. She bit her lip. "And I wish you were here to see it." When Glenn finally responded, it was just one sentence. "You were always someone." Sierra listened to it a dozen times, sitting in the dark with tears on her cheeks and her daughter's fingers wrapped around her wrist. It took nearly 2 weeks before they saw each other again. Glenn arrived at night, quiet, hooded, walking like a ghost down the alley behind the flower stall. Sierra was waiting, not because he'd promised to come, but because she had started hoping he might. She didn't run to him, but she didn't hesitate either. "Is it safe?" she asked. "For now," he said. "I left everything. The records, the badge. It's done." And then silence, until she stepped forward and placed her hands on his chest. "I didn't think you'd come. I didn't think I'd survive long enough to." Their eyes met, and the moment stretched, years of captivity, of silence, of longing all converging in a single breath. When she kissed him, it wasn't soft or uncertain. It was raw, needy, alive. Glenn didn't pull away. When their lips parted, she whispered against his jaw, "You didn't just free us. You brought me back to life." "I didn't do it alone," he said, resting his forehead against hers. Behind them, from the shadow of the doorway, a small voice rose. "Is he staying now?" They turned. Leary stood barefoot in the doorway, blinking sleepily. Her voice was small but sure. Sierra glanced at Glenn. He knelt. "If you'll have me." Leary nodded. "Mama likes you." He smiled. "I like her too." The child's arms wrapped around his neck without fear, and for the first time in years, none of them looked back. The kettle whistled softly. Morning light poured through the cracked skylight, catching on dust motes and turning the small kitchen golden. The walls were still bare, patched with old sealant, but they didn't feel cold anymore. Not with the smell of tea steeping, the quiet sound of soft footsteps, and the warmth of another body moving just beyond the corner of the room. Glenn stood at the counter, his sleeves rolled up, spoon in hand. He wasn't used to silence feeling this good, this honest. Behind him, the rustle of fabric, a quiet yawn. He turned. Sierra was wrapped in one of his shirts, oversized and loose, her long white hair tangled from sleep. She blinked slowly, adjusting to the light, then looked at him. A slow smile curved her lips. Not the guarded kind she used to wear, but something fragile and new. He offered her the mug. "Still sweet, like you like it." She took it carefully, fingers brushing his. They lingered there, touching lightly, as if neither of them wanted to let go. "Did you sleep?" he asked. Sierra nodded, taking a small sip. "Yes, I dreamed, but it wasn't a memory this time." He waited. "It was here," she whispered. "You were humming. Leary was painting the wall with flowers." He smiled faintly. "Then I'd call that a vision." She set the mug down, stepping closer. Her fingers found the hem of his shirt. "You stayed." "I told you I would." Her voice softened. "I know. It just still surprises me." He reached up, cupping her cheek. "What do I have out there that's better than this?" Her breath caught. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Their foreheads touched, the space between them quiet and tender. Not urgent, not desperate, just full. Then a muffled thump. Tiny footsteps patted across the floor. Leary appeared in the doorway, hair sticking up in every direction, a small blanket clutched to her chest. She rubbed her eyes and frowned. "Mama, Glenn didn't disappear in the night?" Sierra knelt. "No, sweetheart, he's here." Leary blinked at him. You're like the kettle. You make noise in the morning. Glenn laughed, crouching to her level. I promise not to whistle too loud. The child thought for a moment. You can stay, but only if you make pancakes. Deal. She offered him a solemn pinky. He linked it with his own, sealing it. Sierra watched, eyes shining. Later after breakfast, burned pancakes and all, they sat in the tiny courtyard behind the flat. The air was warmer here, filtered through living roofs and recycled heat grids from neighboring buildings. Plants climbed up from old crates. Someone's forgotten tomato vine clung stubbornly to a rusted beam. Leary painted on a scrap of wall with pigment Glenn had bartered for. Sierra sat beside him on a crate, their shoulders touching. She exhaled slowly. It doesn't feel real. He didn't reply, just reached for her hand. I keep thinking someone will knock, or find us, or they won't. She glanced at him. I know how to disappear, Glenn said simply, and you don't belong in a cage anymore. You belong in the sun. With her, Sierra's voice was a whisper. And you. He turned to her fully, lifting her hand to his lips. I belong where you are. She kissed him then, not from desperation or relief, but from certainty. Behind them, Leary called out, Mama, look! They turned. The wall was covered in lopsided white flowers with long green stems. It's us, she explained. 3 flowers, because you and Glenn and me. We grow now. Sierra reached for her daughter, pulling her close. You're right, she murmured. We do. Glenn wrapped his arms around them both, and for the first time since he could remember, he wasn't watching for an escape route. He wasn't calculating risks or listening for alarms. He was simply home. The past would never vanish completely. There were scars that wouldn't fade, memories that would resurface in dreams. But here, in this tiny corner of a broken world, something had started to mend. 3 broken lives, 1 second chance, and a love built not from grand gestures, but from a man who stayed, a woman who dared to speak again, and a child who still believed in flowers. They didn't need anything more. They had each other, and that was enough. The wind on Sparrow's surface always carried a scent of moss from the northern marshes, of brine from the thawed polar cliffs, and of growing things, wild things. Leary sprinted across the ridge ahead of them, her dark cloak flaring behind her. She was nearly 10 now, tall for her age, her long white hair braided tightly down her back. Her laughter carried over the wind. Mama, Glenn, it's blooming. She knelt near the ground, her fingers grazing the violet-petaled flowers pushing through the soil. A rare sight on this side of the moon, even rarer to see them this early in the season. Sierra and Glenn caught up slowly, hand in hand. I told her not to run so far, Sierra murmured, though there was no real bite in her tone. Glenn smiled, squeezing her hand. She knows the land now. It knows her, too. Sierra turned to him. She was born in a cage, and now she chases wildflowers, he whispered. You gave her that. She looked down, touched by the truth in his voice. Their farm outpost, small and stubborn, lay behind them, tucked into the slope. It wasn't much, just recycled polycrete and salvaged steel panels, but it was theirs. Vegetation climbed up its walls now. The greenhouses were operational, and beneath its roof no one raised their voice in fear. Glenn brushed wind-tossed strands of white hair from Sierra's face. She's strong, like her mother. I was only ever strong because of you, she said softly. No, he corrected gently. You were always strong. I just stayed long enough to see it. Her gaze flicked to his, a flicker of emotion tightening her throat. He stepped closer. You remember the night I found you? I remember thinking, it was a dream, she said, that no one would hear us. That kindness wasn't real. And now? Sierra wrapped her arms around his waist, resting her cheek to his chest. Now I know better. He tilted her chin up. Her eyes, still luminous green, met his, unafraid, unwavering. Say it again, he murmured. What? That I was real. You were more than real, she whispered. You were hope. He kissed her then, deeply, slowly, without hesitation. It wasn't a kiss stolen in fear or born from desperation. It was patient, tender, and grounding. It spoke of shared mornings, of cradling Leary through fever, of planting trees under a twin sunset, of choosing each other again and again. When they finally parted, her lips were swollen with warmth and memory. "I love you," she breathed, more than breath. "I know," he said simply, "and I love you back, with the life we built, with the girl who paints our walls, with every choice that led us to now." They turned together, watching Leary twirl in a circle, arms wide in the wind. Behind them, their home stood strong. Ahead of them, only spring. And between them, nothing left unsaid, not anymore.